So hello, everybody. I'm Hadar. I'm the marketing manager at Received. I'm really happy to have you all here today with us. So Arben today is going to be all about optimizing your financial operations and how you can optimize the processes you have in place, not only to affect the bottom line in your finance team, but also throughout your entire organization. And we have this great panel waiting for you here today to share their insights and experience with you. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to write them in the chat. And at the end, I will be sure to read them out loud for the panel to answer. And this will also be recorded, so we will send that over to you in the following days after this session. And now I'm very happy to introduce you to our discussion moderator, Gilad Andorn. So Gilad, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Hadar, and I'm happy to be with all this finance brainpower in the same panel. My name is Gilad Andorn. I'm currently managing Auction Mobility, which is the biggest SaaS provider for auction houses. And before managing Auction Mobility, I was the VP Finance at Live Auctioneers, which is the biggest online marketplace for live auctions in the arts and collectible space. And I was the head of finance from the day it was VC backed, took it through a private equity acquisition, and then to another acquisition by a publicly traded company from the UK. And I would love to kind of introduce our panelists. Tal, do you want to go first?
Sure, thanks, Gilad. So, hi everyone, good to meet you. I'm Tal Kirschenbaum. I'm the founder and CEO of Ledge. Ledge is an automated finance operations platform, essentially helping finance teams automate their day-to-day things such as reconciliation, handling of payment errors, and treasury-related tasks. Essentially everything that you have to do in order to know what's actually going on with your cash and actuals, we take care of by integrating with a company's ERP, invoicing solution, payment processors, banks, internal database, and so on, essentially everywhere that you'd find finance-related data.
Thank you, Tal. Emerson?
Thanks, Gilad. So I'm Emerson Verrier. I'm the VP of Finance at Argyle. We are a user credentialed and user permission verification of income and employment provider. Prior to that, was an investment banker at JP Morgan, and then was the VP of Finance and Investor Relations at Transfix, where we merged via SPAC and raised over $300 million there. So really happy to be here today.
Thank you, Emerson. Roy?
Hi, thanks, Gilad. It's great to be here, super excited. It's great to see so many familiar names and new ones, and hope you'll enjoy your time with us. Co-founder and CEO at Received, where we do billing for technology companies. Specifically, we specialized with B2B software companies, and we do really well with complex billing scenarios. It's good to be here.
Thank you, Roy. And Pallavi?
Thanks, Gilad. Hi, everybody. I'm Pallavi Sud. I run finance, G&A teams, and customer success at Rutter API. Rutter is the universal API for finance, payments, and commerce data. Before Rutter, I was on the finance and strategy team at Checker. I joined when they were a Series C company and went through a couple of fundraisers with them. Prior to that, I was at Adyen and went through IPO with them, and worked at NetSuite through their acquisition by Oracle. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I think it's a really unique opportunity with really so much finance brainpower, and one Zoom call is a really good opportunity to kind of have a really interesting conversation. And I think from a timing standpoint, we're probably in the most interesting time in the last decade in terms of how do people need to manage their finances with the amount of uncertainty we're seeing in the macroeconomic environment. Obviously, it's much harder to raise funds. The cost of capital has gone up dramatically. Everything is becoming much more tight and much more sensitive. But we're also seeing a very kind of interesting trend where a lot of innovation is coming into the CFO suite and into finance teams. So that convergence of uncertainty in the macro environment with technology impacting the CFO suite I think is a really interesting backdrop to this conversation. And I think it's a good segue to our first question. And I'll start off with Tal, kind of looking at the last 18 months. And obviously with kind of negative macro trends and investment in technology or spend on software is going down, we're actually seeing a lot of investment coming into the CFO suite and the technology element in the CFO suite. And those investments are actually driving value. Kind of what are your thoughts on that and kind of those trends?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a very interesting time in the market, of course, with everything that's happening on a macro level. As interest rates are going up, inflation is going up, companies essentially are now having to focus on the most important things, which are cash flow, profitability. I think specifically for tech companies, another major focus, of course, is revenue, especially in the earlier stages of companies' life cycles. I think right now there's an even greater focus on finance teams and on companies as they really look for these pools of potential revenue that they can try and tap into, as well as for these traps of inefficiencies and losses that they now need to avoid, even more so than they've had to avoid over the past decade or so when the market was up and to the right. And so now we're seeing a lot of increased focus on trying to improve the high pockets of value. Things such as improving collections, improving the order to cash cycle are more important than ever. There's a realization that teams need to be more efficient, essentially do more with either the existing status quo or even with less, as what we're seeing. There's a recent NetSuite survey that came out that actually mentioned that optimizing cash flow right now is the most important tool that can be used against inflation, something that Roy and I actually just spoke about earlier today. Again, from a broad standpoint, what we're seeing right now is that things are difficult. We're seeing LTV decrease. We're seeing customer acquisition cost increase. And we're having these second order implications where everything essentially is getting compressed. You'll find things such as reconciliation errors that are affecting not just in the sense of companies end up losing funds, but also you'll find hits to customer relationships. And these also have operational challenges as well. When a customer perhaps doesn't see a payment that they've made reflected in their account, now it's an operational challenge as well. Support needs to get involved, sales needs to get involved, and especially in this time of struggle, in this pressure that we're seeing in the market on companies, that has a much higher cost. And I think as a byproduct of that, anything that can help CFOs, finance teams really gain efficiencies, find those pockets of value, decrease losses, all of that is now getting a lot of attention. And I think that is, again, exacerbated by what we're seeing in the market, but also, if we're honest, a byproduct of that specific area and function being overlooked and neglected for many years. We've seen innovation happen in many other functions and areas, and not as much, at least, within that specific stack. So I think now we're seeing both of those factors working in unison.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting. We're seeing two contradicting phenomenons. One is that there's a systems purge. Like every other CFO we're speaking with is doing a full audit of the systems, getting rid of the fat, getting rid of systems that just don't cut it. And it's really across the board. And on the other hand, we're seeing more interest in adopting technology solutions for the CFO stack. The same C4 report or an NetSuite report that Tal mentioned says that 75% of CFOs are, and this was about 3 months ago, this survey, 75% of CFOs are considering increasing their investment in CFO technology. So I think there's kind of two things here. First of all, there's market pressures, and one example is that we're seeing more usage pricing being adopted, and that's because of customer demand. I mean, customers no longer want to pay that 30,000 upfront license fee, and they just say, I want to de-risk and let me, give me a pay-as-you-go kind of pricing model. So there's enormous market pressures that that make it a necessity for CFOs to automate more, to systemize, and to adopt new solutions.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback too. I think a couple of great points. Not only is the expectation now that there's cost cutting, you need to have better data. You've got two things going on. One, which is boards, investors are expecting way more from finance teams. Like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Series B companies, Series A companies did not need to be audited. Now they have to be audited. There's a huge amount of pressure to have higher quality financials. In addition to that, you're expected to do it with like less G&A spend. 5 years ago, I never had an investor ask me what G&A was a percentage of revenue. Now, like everybody's asking. So you need to be significantly more performant to raise capital in this world. Like the days of like no G&A as a percentage of revenue, not knowing what that is, or not having audited financials are kind of over, it feels like. But at the same time, you need to do it with like less people and less tools and less spend. And so that those two factors coming together at once is why, one of the reasons I think why tools like Receive and tools like Ledge and Rutter and these amazing finance tools are becoming popular, is because you're like, well, I can't just hire 5 accountants to have them go collect all my receivables anymore. That just doesn't work, right? I have to find like more innovative solutions to get more with less. So those coming together has been really interesting for us, at least.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And as a former VP finance, and I've seen how finance integrates into the entire support and service flow of customers, I can definitely kind of agree with what Tal said about the importance of being accurate and fast and responsive on the finance team, and utilizing the data to kind of provide better service, because every customer engagement now is key, where it's again, CACs are going up, LTVs are going down. Everyone is kind of hypersensitive on the level of support you're providing them. Finance is just a crucial part of that. And I think historically, it was not perceived as one of those kind of entities that has that importance in retaining and retaining customers and acquiring new customers. Which is actually a kind of an interesting point in kind of how the challenges CFOs are facing and finance operations teams, especially in the B2B space, have kind of changed. Roy, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about kind of how you view those and what tools or processes CFOs can utilize to address those kind of changing challenges.
Yeah, I think that what really stands out for us talking with customers is what we call the B2B spaghetti, or rather B2B software spaghetti. I think that what happens with software companies, you bring a new product to the market. It's not really obvious how to price that product, what channels to use, and in B2B, on top of like inventing new technology, there's a whole bunch of pricing innovation that goes on, and that's because you bring that new product, that new notion, and it's not really obvious how to price that. So with B2C, you have standard contracts, you have simple pricing, you have transparent pricing for your entire audience. But with B2B, what happens is that pricing models are complex, they're innovative. OpenView talks about this a lot, how SaaS and usage pricing are kind of competing. We think, and I think OpenView says the same, that the future pricing is complex, right? You just need to have flexibility. And then there's a ton of contract complexity, right? We say that each contract is a snowflake. So there's a ton of, and I didn't even mention now usage data coming in and billing, for example, in our little category, we see billing beginning to be like an operational challenge, right? Because now we have usage data coming in and you need to attribute that usage data to each bill. So what I'm trying to say here is that with B2B software, there is a bespoke element, there's like a complexity element, and that makes like buying for your CFO stack even more challenging because, I mean, who builds for a edge case? Like every customer that we speak with think there's they are an edge case, and that's actually what we're trying to solve. You know, we're trying to solve we're bringing a platform where you have a total pricing model, contract usage flexibility in a way where you can configure your own things. And you know, one of the questions that we see CFO and VP Finance ask themselves, and I'm really interested into, you know, in your opinions, Pallavi, Emerson, and Gilad, is the build versus buy challenge, right? Because if you think, you know, I'm an edge case, you know, no system out there is, you know, can really meet my needs. All of a sudden, you're talking about building in-house, you know, opening a new product line. You know, you might be doing marketing tech, but now you want to build invoicing or treasury management or AP just because you think you're an edge case. And we see that challenge and question being a pretty central one for growing B2B software companies.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Pallavi, do you want to address, you know, some of the challenges Roy spoke about?
Yeah, I'm laughing because Roy and I were just talking about this the other day. I think the migration towards usage-based billing or some combination of platform and usage-based has been so important. But it's different. People are just not used to that. And it's one of the best ways to kind of mitigate losing a customer altogether is to meet them where they are. But none of the systems and processes that most CFOs have in place today are equipped to handle that. And the level of complexity that managing multiple billing models and contract structures adds to your team is pretty tough. So it's really exciting to see the proliferation of new tooling out there that is trying to meet me where I am, because as Roy mentioned, my engineering team doesn't have time to sit out and build out a totally new product just for me. And as others have mentioned, G&A is typically the area of the business that gets the least amount of investment. So we typically have to bootstrap until we figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And to piggyback on that and what Roy said on build versus buy, I think now when budgets are getting tighter, you don't want to invest your modular engineer in solving an in-house problem. You want to kind of invest that engineering force in increasing revenue, and kind of with that happening, I think the willingness to build in-house proprietary solution has gone down dramatically. But what has happened, which is very positive, is you're seeing a lot of innovation going into that space that gives you much more versatility. And you know, I think the technology that exists now for the CFO suite allows you to kind of deal with those edge cases and unique cases in a very efficient way. And kind of changing gears from challenges to successes and how do you measure those? Kind of, Pallavi, based on your experience, could you talk a bit about the KPIs that you measure to see how successful your FinOps team is? And talk a bit on data utilization and how do you use the data to kind of measure yourself and your team?
Yeah, I'll talk about a couple of different sets of metrics. One is more around the traditional FinOps function. So the traditional FinOps team is almost entirely a process-based team. And the most straightforward way to measure success in a process-based team is to see how efficient they are at executing on those processes. So At the highest level, KPIs around how timely your team is at closing a period. So for example, month close must be executed within 7 days, 3 days, 14 days, and how accurate you are at closing the period. So for example, how many adjustments you make to prior periods after close are kind of the table stakes KPIs for FinOps teams. Then one level deeper, it's really important to hold FinOps accountable to how efficient your money in and money out processes are. So KPIs around the aging of receivables and payables are equally as important to me as how good you are at closing the month. You want to track how long it takes you to generate invoices and how much of that process is manual. You want to set goals around cash collection from customers. So for example, you want no more than 15% of your AR balance to be more than 60 days overdue. You want to track how much of your bad debt write-off is due to internal dunning inefficiencies versus customer circumstances that are out of your control. You also want to track how long it takes you to reimburse vendors and employees. I think, especially with employees, you want to make sure that their cash flow is not affected by your own internal inefficiencies. On the procurement side, you want to be able to track the ability to reduce unit costs at renewals. If you are growing and increasing your usage footprint with a vendor, you want to track improvement in payment terms. Time value of money is super important these days. You want to track being able to consolidate unnecessary spend. As Roi mentioned, that B2B spaghetti proliferates everywhere in a company. And I don't know, beyond this, FinOps to me is the foundation of any strategic business decisioning. So if the data in your financial systems is wrong, your ability to make the right decisions with that data becomes inherently less efficient. And in current economic conditions, and at smaller companies where you don't have the luxury of, a large built out FP&A or FinOps teams, to me, the strategic KPIs of FinOps team may be responsible for also include those related to hitting your company's financial plan. So forecast accuracy, budgets versus actuals variance, did what you say was going to happen actually happen? There also could be treasury investment goals. So making sure your spare cash is growing and you're meeting your liquidity goals at the same time. I could go on forever talking about these KPIs, but I would love to open it up to the other panelists.
I was going to add a more qualitative thing to everything you just said, which I think you hit all the nail on the head. But one of the running jokes that we have is this happens a lot at startups where you're okay, you say this number and I say this number. Why are these numbers different? Does anybody know why they're different, right? And it's simple numbers, right? I could go to most Series A, B, or C companies, or bigger or smaller, and say how many employees do you have, and everyone will give me a different number, right? And so to me, one of the things that I always push really hard, and exactly what Paul was saying, and this is a systems question, right? Is everybody singing the same song here, right? We all agree we have this many employees. This is what our past due balance is. This is what our cash balance is. Can we see and access and feel and touch all of this reasonably easily? Because if you've got different executives that are looking or thinking different things, you just run into all kinds of problems about the strategic direction of the business and the decisions that need to be made. And you run into trust issues, and it creates a lot of havoc. So everything you said, Pallavi, is so critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Just maybe to add on that, it's actually quite amazing how difficult getting something as basic as simply knowing what your actuals are or agreeing on very standard, what seem to be straightforward figures and values, such as number of employees, how challenging that can be. And Emerson, to your point, it's not even a matter of simply having visibility to the right data set, but it's actually also having alignment across that data set, which oftentimes is unbelievably fragmented, and being able to integrate all that together to get to a point where you actually generate the visibility, the confidence in what you have is really the basis for everything, right? I mean, let's take FP&A as an example. For you to do FP&A effectively, you have to know what your actuals are. And that is a thing that oftentimes gets lost as the basic requirement for that process.
Yeah, I think one thing that is really interesting in kind of where we are right now is that a lot of the executives have not experienced a cash constrained environment where the cost of capital isn't zero, right? In the last 15 years, the cost of making a mistake was relatively low. But I think now when cost of capital is going up, opportunity costs are going up, the importance of having the correct data as a CFO and making the right strategic decisions becomes crucial for the business to survive in a harsh environment, which I think is kind of why it's great that all this innovation is now giving CFOs much better tools to make decisions, because each decision is much more crucial. I would like to kind of ask Emerson, what advice would you give to kind of B2B SaaS companies looking to really make their FinOps operations better and more optimal? And kind of what lessons have you learned in kind of obviously your very impressive experience in kind of managing those areas and in improving operations?
Yeah, lessons learned in blood, no doubt. Yeah, no, look, I think the advice that I would have is technical debt is a real thing in finance, right? And I think we're all under an immense amount of pressure to just get things done, right? And to just like get the invoices out, collect the cash, close the books, get the audit done, whatever it is, it's like just get it done and don't necessarily stop and think about the process. But over time, if you're growing, knock on wood, right, those processes just will blow up your entire company. And I look back, I was the first finance hire at Turbo, which eventually, you know, grew to be quite large and acquired. And we probably had 40 people on our finance team back then. We probably could have had 10 if it was run properly and if I knew what I was doing, which I didn't. So, you know, and also these systems didn't exist, right? Things like Receive, like these systems that would have been incredibly helpful to us back then were just non-existent, right? So there's certainly a need for them. The other piece of advice that I would give to everybody is if you are not a kind of systems thinker as a finance person, I don't care if you're an accountant or a controller or VP of finance or CFO, if you do not have the ability to think through all the systems in your stack and how they connect, how they send data, how they receive data, where things break, you are really going to struggle for the next 10 years. Because what we've seen at Argyle is a good example. And I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back here, but we've got a finance team of 3 people, and we're able to get a near PCAOB audit done. We're able to do all of our billing on the first day of every month. We're able to do all of this incredible stuff. But we decided to specifically hire an accountant and a controller that have incredibly good systems thinking, right? They've done NetSuite implementations. They've done API implementations using various API tools. They've done billing systems implementations, and they can actually get into the weeds and think about how the data moves around and how it should flow, which just makes a 3-person team as capable as a 10 or a 15-person team. So the 2 pieces of advice is like, if you do non-scalable stuff, make sure you think about what the scalable stuff will look like. And second of all, like hire people that have technical capabilities and can think technically. They don't have to be engineers, but if you don't know what an API is, or if you don't know what an integration is, it's going to be really hard to build anything meaningful in the finance org.
To build on that, I was at a great event in Tel Aviv called CFOs in Jeans. Tal was there as well. It was, I think, a couple of months ago. It was just a gathering of, it was a casual conversation of CFOs across various SaaS growth stage, and a pretty big audience of CFOs. And one of the big questions that arose there when talking about systems was, for when do you buy? Like, do I solve today's problem or do I solve tomorrow's problem? So obviously, when you're a seed company, you're not going to buy a system for when you're pre-IPO, right? Just that doesn't make sense. But also, you don't want to buy for now. If you're growing fast, you probably want to think about, when do I switch from QuickBooks to NetSuite, right? So that what is the time horizon for my systems is a pretty big question for finance leaders, we find.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say just about that. We continuously see kind of the inverse of that case, where teams don't prep properly for scale. And suddenly all these issues that were never once a big issue They just kind of add up and they compound a lot of them. And oftentimes we see this step function change with specific processes and tasks that early on and without scale are not an issue. No one thinks about them. Things are easy to do and get done quite easily. And then over time, they start becoming more and more complex, and they pass that point of scale, being able to solve some issues. So as you try and scale your finance team to meet the growth of the business, that no longer cuts it. And let's not even talk about it being inefficient. And then all of a sudden, something that wasn't a problem anymore is now this overwhelming problem that no one can do anything about, and really just grinds the business down to a complete halt.
Yeah, our thesis for that has been to build kind of reactively, but then buy proactively, right? Meaning like, okay, we've got this issue. It doesn't seem super material. We can get a good engineer or two and we can build something that can kind of hodgepodge this together. But then at some point you're looking at this and you're like, ooh, this dam's going to break at some point. You need to go buy something like a Received or something that is going to like solve this thing that we no longer, as Pallavi mentioned earlier, can like throw 10 engineers at because it's just becoming too material to our operations.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that sometimes people overlook is the run rate cost of building something. So you have one engineer build one time a hacky solution, but then you need to continuously invest in maintaining that. And again, going back to the period we're at, where cash is constrained, opportunity cost is big. You want to make sure that you're investing in a smart, strategic way, and kind of hacky solutions are just short-term solutions, but actually have long-term implications and long-term costs. Which I think kind of is a good segue to the question that is kind of on a lot of CFOs' mind, and kind of would love Roi to take a first stab at that, is kind of how should companies think about their finance operations tech stack, and kind of when evaluating and thinking through solutions and through different technologies, what's kind of the best approach and process to think through those?
Yeah, I'll add my 2 cents on this. I think there's this ongoing debate about the ERP versus point solutions. Who will win, right? I mean, it's the big match. ERP was kind of dismantled, and then some companies like Rippling and Gusto are trying to reassemble it. We obviously we're not objective here because we're building in billing, so I'm drinking my own Kool-Aid here. But I think the generic doesn't work, and I think that you need to buy from people who are building for you. And eventually, what's going to happen is that there's going to be these core systems. The ERPs and the CRMs with the solutions that do a great job, who are not really that specific, not like all the way point solutions, but are wide enough to cover a category. And these are kind of the planets, if you follow my analogy, of the ERP and CRM sons that are really core systems. I mean, you got Salesforce and HubSpot covering basically 80% of the market. And on the other end, really for software companies, what we're seeing, it's NetSuite for a growth company. The bottom line here, I think, is that connectivity is key, right? If you understand that you need specialized solutions for treasury management, for billing, for corporate spend, right? And you're sticking with your NetSuite. NetSuite is not gonna go anytime soon. Connectivity is key. And I think some people on the panel talked about that, like how data, objects, and logic kind of flows between the systems. Emerson mentioned the data discrepancy, but what happens if data flows from your Salesforce to your NetSuite through the some of these solutions, right? And just to finish that thought, I think that companies like Rutter are going to play a major part in the CFO stack, because when you build, like, you don't want to build your own banking infrastructure. You also don't want to natively integrate, at least in the start, with all the the NetSuites of the world, all the CRM and ERPs and accounting that's out there. So connectivity is going to play a major part in the CFO stack, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe to echo what Roy said, and I loved, I loved hearing what you said, Roy, about the fact that finance teams are really looking for tools built for them. That I think is another major part in how teams should be thinking about their finance operations. They want to find solutions that have the core values of finance baked into them, things such as visibility, control, flexibility, but then also the ability to actually operate independently. And this is independently of other teams, other stakeholders at the company. And we all kind of spoke about the fact that, it's an unfortunate reality that finance teams are oftentimes unable to get support from the R&D organization. It is what it is. The R&D organization is there to help advance the company's roadmap, to help eventually generate revenues. They are not there to help finance folks solve what is really a back office issue. And with that, for teams selecting finance operations tools, they need to select tools that they themselves can not just use every day on their own, but also implement and configure on their own. I think that's going to be one of the biggest differentiators that we'll see in this space.
One funny thing that we saw after we started building is that for usage data consumption, for example, we thought, API is great. Everyone's going to take API. And then we found out that finance folks love their CSVs. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that CSV data lets finance folks adopt solutions without getting budgets, buy-in, and time from R&D, and they can. It kind of gives them autonomy over their processes. So I think that freedom from core integrations from R&D resources is super important, and making sure also that the systems that you're buying do a really great job with integrating into your CRM, into your ERP, and keeping that data integrity and consistency without needing for extra R&D integration.
Yeah, I think talking about the CSV approach is actually really interesting, and I would love to kick off a conversation, and Tal can take the lead, but I would love to hear from Emerson and Pallavi. And there's a lot of finance people in the audience and in this forum. Obviously, finance people are very risk averse and conservative. Kind of what are some of the things and pushbacks that you guys see in the market in terms of implementing automation and innovation into the CFO stack and into the CFO suite, and kind of how do you overcome those?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something that we are seeing in the market, but also seeing evolve over time. So I think the context is there, what we spoke about, right? The fact that it's been decades really that finance teams have been overlooked, while other areas saw pretty significant investment and advancements as well. And the general sentiment within finance teams is do no harm. If something isn't broken, don't try and fix it. And there are, of course, some additional factors in place here. I think that finance teams are rightfully so quite wary and cautious of anything that involves a long and a very high touch implementation process. They're cautious of things that also have a slow ramp up, or they can't demonstrate value very quickly. They're cautious about things where they can start small, perhaps, and have to commit right from the start, from the get-go, to going all in. Now, again, these are all really valid concerns, but what we're now seeing is that the market is in fact changing. And this gets to the previous points that we discussed, right? Again, teams are looking for solutions that are built for them. Finance teams want to use solutions that were built very specifically for them, ones that they can use on their own, implement on their own, configure on their own, and ones that do not require a month-long implementation process. They want to get started quickly. They want to see those results instantaneously. And I think that's a lot of what we're now seeing in the broader category of the CFO tech stack. And it's a very welcome change.
Pallavi, can you talk a bit about the kind of how have you adjusted over time, and how kind of your team's mentality and approach towards bringing innovation into the CFO stack has changed?
Yeah, I think historically, I agree with a lot of what's already been said, that if it's not broken, we don't need to fix it mentality is very, very true. I think, historically also, finance buyers are some of the toughest buyers to sell to because we are extremely money conscious and discerning versus like a sales and marketing buyer or an HR buyer. So we've been tough nuts to crack, and therefore people historically haven't really built for us, but our tech stack has been the one that's been left behind in the dust a little bit. And given that this new refocusing on efficiency and the proliferation of point solutions that has come up in the past like 5 years, I feel like really is when the market began growing and kind of exploding. It's been amazing kind of, coming into a new company at Rutter and coming into this economic environment, identifying the inefficiencies, and then figuring out ways to kind of block and tackle some of these, because my headcount's not growing right now, but my workload is, and therefore something has to change. So that is kind of what's been driving a lot of the change right now internally at my company. Kind of taking a half step back, I think, the midterm winners in this space are going to be the point solutions that are best at owning their workflows and really truly understand what my needs are and build solutions for me. I actually think the longer term winners in this industry are going to be the people that build a better NetSuite for my B2B SaaS business. And you'll see kind of like the proliferation of vertical based ERPs popping up as well, which I think are really, really interesting. But I think it's just a confluence of factors that's pushing the change right now. And if you are in a finance systems role at your company, it is an excellent time to start looking at different solutions out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of kind of short-term winners versus long-term winners. I think as we've seen the development of vertical B2B SaaS, we'll see the next evolution of vertical B2B ERP solutions for kind of those types of businesses. But kind of going back to your point on how kind of the team has changed in its approach and mentality to innovation, Emerson, can you talk a bit about the change in skill sets required by finance teams? And you mentioned it earlier, kind of the fact that you have a 3-people team that can actually kind of historically was 10. What type of skills would kind of FinOps and CFO suite people would need to deal with kind of the change and evolution in the CFO suite tech?
Yeah, I hit it a little bit earlier. I think we think a lot at Argyle about the happy path of order to cash, right? So order to cash, for everyone, that's just to be clear, right? Meaning there has to be a conversation, at least in the enterprise world, between a sales rep and a buyer. Like, can't automate that away, or at least, we'll try. But so that conversation has to happen, and there's something manual there. And then an invoice has to get sent and cash has to be collected, right? And somewhere along the way, there's a lot of things that happen, right? A contract is created, a contract is stored, pricing event is stored and passed along. We're also a usage-based billing business, so we need billable events, and we need to mash that with the contract, right? Somehow all of that needs to go into NetSuite, where you need sales tax, and then you need credit adjustments, and then it needs to go through a payment system, and then, so there's all these pieces. And our kind of holy grail and the way we think about our team is like, we need to be able to, on a happy path day, go all the way from order to cash with no manual intervention. The contract gets uploaded and that is it. Everything else flows through all the way to the end. I think that doesn't always happen, especially in most companies, it doesn't always happen. But our view on kind of the evolving finance team is we want every single person in our org to be able to understand the order to cash process and be able to step in anywhere along the way without engineering support, exactly to Tal's point, right? So if the billing information in Salesforce doesn't get all the way to NetSuite, we need to be able to have someone on the finance team push that via API, not type it in manually, not copy and paste it, but push it via API from one end to the other. And that goes all the way from the accountant to a RevOps analyst to, the controller can do all that and push data across those systems. So, I'll double down on the systems point. I think being competent in all these various systems, not just in how they work, but how they then connect and share data is really, really critical, because as pricing models get more complex, exactly to Roy's point, as contracts get more complex, you cannot have people that are unable to manage these systems and how they interact and how they communicate, or things are going to break. You're not going to collect on cash payments. You're not going to invoice properly. You're going to have a massive finance team, which your investors are going to yell at you about. So there's too many kind of variables there to not have that work properly.
I also want to call out the elephant in the room. I mean, there is a generational shift with the finance leadership. Folks like you guys, millennials, are at the helm, turning into VP finance and CFOs, and tend to be more tech savvy than yesterday's CFOs. That's just the honest truth. And what we find is that being tech savvy, and I think Emerson's kind of I believe statement there was so smart and so well articulated. When you have a systems thinking and you're tech savvy, you can lift your head above the water and actually think about your philosophy, about what you want to be achieved. And when you don't have systems, you tend to do a lot of manual work. That's how your days are going to look like. And also you tend to, your teams balloon up. They tend to be much bigger. So we see a striking difference between these two type of CFOs.
Yeah, I mean, I can completely agree with. I think it's now becoming very clear that we need to work smart, not necessarily hard, and especially as resources become constrained. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for Q&A, so I'll end up with kind of the last question, and would love kind of Roy and Tal to pick that up as leaders in this area. What do you see as kind of the next innovation or evolution in the CFO technology, and kind of what's coming in the pipeline that would make all of our lives much easier and kind of in the foreseeable future?
Tal, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. So, I'll try to be brief about this. I think it's really going to be tools that are going to help teams consolidate their work, integrate their work, and help with workflow automation, help with taking care of the most basic day-to-day things that they deal with, freeing up time for finance leaders and finance professionals to drive significant value and impact on their companies. And I think anything that falls within that category is going to be able to add value. And I think we'll see much, much more of that over time. And I think a lot of those solutions, as we just discussed before, are going to be ones that really fit those exact same characteristics that we discussed. So solutions that can be used almost out of the box with very little ramp up time, very little friction, and ones that are able to be consumed independently of other functions within the company and really help rethink a lot of the processes that have existed for decades, but if we take a critical look at them, have stopped making sense a long time ago. And I think that, unfortunately, for finance professionals, finance is really rife with those types of processes. And I think, but fortunately for companies operating in this space, that presents a lot of opportunity to come in and help introduce greater efficiencies and increase productivity as well.
I'll double down on connectivity. I think connectivity is going to play a major part. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the Gartner CFO conference near Washington, and I really enjoyed this presentation by Gartner's analyst Nisha Vandari, and she talked about, well, a bunch of actually what you guys said. The inherent kind of dichotomy of CFOs. On one hand, they're the gatekeepers, and on the other hand, you can't be left behind. And she, the way she presented connectivity really is as composability. It's a design principle that allows systems to be assembled from smaller independent components. And I think we're going to see more of these specialized components. The challenge is how wide you build, because the CFO stack can't have 50 point solutions. That's obvious. And also, I think we all agree that one ERP just doesn't cut it. So, I mean, for us, like for Tal and I, for example, as builders, is how one of the big questions is how wide you build. I mean, our philosophy at Received is we build wider, not wide because we need to be specialized, but you need to ramp up on capabilities. You need to show how you save a system rather than add a system. So the bar is definitely high. And that's, I think that's, I'm keeping an eye on, how all the pieces are going to come together.
Great. I think that's a great point to kind of stop and move into Q&A, because definitely I think much needed and exciting change is coming into the CFO suite and to the CFO stack. And it's kind of, I think from a timing standpoint, we're in a super interesting time to see how the CFO office changes kind of the traditional way of its operations. Hadar, do you want to kind of walk us through some of the questions?
Yes. Okay, thank you guys. That was so great. I'm back for the Q&A, so I'm going to read out some of the questions that our attendees asked. So the first one is actually for Pallavi. All of you feel free to jump in, but earlier you mentioned what finance teams care about when it comes to procurement. So if you don't mind expanding a little bit about that, and also in the context of today's economy, are they trying to pause it entirely, or what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so I would actually say procurement is even more important today given the economy. Procurement just isn't just buying new things, it's optimizing what you already have. So while you may not be buying anything incremental, procurement is critical for optimizing that existing tech stack, cutting users or modules you're not using, renegotiating pricing, winning favorable payment terms. These all add up in meaningful ways, even if there isn't, anything new that you're adding to your stack. So, one of our internal initiatives these days is to revisit our entire B2B spaghetti and figure out what we actually need and what we don't, what the trade-offs are. So it's, until budgets open up a little bit more, procurement is super critical.
And if it's helpful, we recently implemented a new procurement tool, and exactly to kind of some of the points earlier, there's this proliferation of new low-code, no-code procurement tools that are incredibly user-friendly, that are incredibly easy to get up and running off the ground, and that have more functionality than the Coupas of yore. Which are great tools, right? And fantastic and built for certain enterprises, but the modern kind of set of tools is coming there as well. And it's amazing to have people at the company reach out to me and be like, oh, I submitted a request. It was super easy. I'm like, wow, I never thought I would hear that till the day I died. So, it's great to see like user-friendly stuff and new technologies start to move into the stack as well there.
Okay, great. So next question, this is for the entire panel. So how would you guys recommend finance teams that don't really have anyone that's tech savvy enough and is kind of struggling with innovation and incorporating new technology? Do you have any recommendations on how to tackle that?
I can take a stab. I think what kind of one of the things that we did with my finance team is invest a lot in training and upskilling. And I think Roy made that point, kind of that intergenerational shift. Make sure that you have a mix of talent that can kind of upskill internally as well. We've invested a lot in training and really building up capabilities. And I think what's interesting about working for B2B technology companies is that you have a lot of in-house resources that can kind of really upskill just the basic fundamentals of what does an API look like? How does data integration work? How do you think from a technology standpoint to solving a solution versus process or headcount? I think we found that to be really useful to train. Even we had a really old school accountant that's kind of now an API master, and they kind of learn coding on their free time and SQL, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people are really kind of eager to learn more, and they understand that's what needs to happen for them to kind of flourish in this environment. So you'll find that even kind of older finance people who are used to doing the things they do for kind of a long time would love to get access to that knowledge and to that type of technology.
Okay, amazing. Since we have our time is practically over, I'm just gonna ask one last question. So this is also for all of you. How do you recommend the finance teams to balance the need for both short-term, need to reduce costs, in this current economy versus the need to invest in new tools so they could save later on?
Quiet group. I'll go back to what I said earlier, right? Which is like, I think we all operate in a world where we all want to grow. Presumably a lot of people on this call are companies that want to grow. I think it's okay to do unscalable things for a very, very short amount of time to see if they work. Because a lot of times you're just saying like, hey, let's try this new pricing model, or like, let's try this new contract payment system, and like, let's see if this works. You're probably not going to go out and buy a whole new system because you're testing something. There's a lot of testing happening at all times. So as I kind of said earlier, right, like build reactively because you're saying, hey, I want to try something. But once you know this is a path you're going down and you're certain that this is not going away and this is the future of your company, trying to build something internally for almost all use cases, you're just going to have a bad time. You're going to invest more than you think. You're going to have more issues than you think. And by the way, to Tal's point earlier, your finance team is not going to be able to troubleshoot, which really sucks, as opposed to using tools where, it's more finance friendly and it's something where you've got a dev team and a support team and all these people behind you that are building a better point solution than anything, your engineers could do.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This was such a great session. Thank you also, everybody who joined us. I remind you that you will receive the recording in the following days. So again, thank you so much. And thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.